August 1998. Still working at Frame Art Galleries. Nothing else really going on personally, except that today I took a chunk out of my head while I was shaving. I've lost a lot of blood. If I look a little pale, I'm starting to feel a little woozy. I feel like Stu at the end of Scream. Hopefully I won't pass out while I'm making this video. I think about half my blood is gone. But all of that aside, let's jump into the books that I read in August of 1998, and we're starting with a big one. This one's a little bit popular. Some people say that it's their favorite coming-of-age story. Some people say it's their favorite book by this author, and that would be Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. Robert R. McCammon. And this is about Corey Mackinson. He's, how old is he? 11 years old. He and his dad are out. They see a car plunge into a bottomless lake. And they try to rescue him, and Corey sees something traumatic, and that leads to all these events with killers and people with powers. It's a big honking book. Difficult to summarize without just reading the back of it to you. But fantastic. As I said, a lot of people, when talking about coming-of-age stories, you've got The Body by Stephen King, a.k.a. Stand By Me. And some people would say Ghoul, Brian Keene. I mean, that is a coming-of-age story. Some people would pick that as their favorite. It's a great book. But most people I know, whenever it comes up, Boy's Life is the one that people talk about. And again, when people talk about Robert McCammon, this is often picked as their favorite Robert McCammon book. It is a great, great coming-of-age story. And then we follow that up with some craziness, which is Godzilla 2000 by Mark Saraceni. And in this, some meteorites crash to Earth, a bunch of different monsters appear and, start causing havoc. And this teenager is recruited into G-Force. He's going to be trained to help fight these monsters. Things aren't working. And it might take Godzilla to help. But is he a help? I mean, he's stomping on things as he's going to fight these monsters. Fun books if you're a Godzilla fan. They got these little monster logos there. So every chapter, depending on which the monster is, you'll have the logo to tell you what monster is going to be in that chapter. But good giant monster fun. Love me some Godzilla. Then we have the last book that I have in my collection at the moment. One of the greatest books. One of my favorite authors of all time. And this is A Savage Season by Joe R. Lansdale. It is the first Hap and Leonard book. I've talked about it before because I've read it before. Hap's ex-lover, Trudy, comes to town talking about her current husband. Has this plan. There was a robbery. Car with all this money went into the river, the Sabine, I believe. Or maybe it's not the Sabine. Maybe it's a different river. And it doesn't matter. Went into a river. It was never recovered. Trudy's current husband, has a plan to get the money, but they need Hap and Leonard's help because they know the area. They know the river. But there's killers and all sorts of craziness going on. Absolutely fantastic book from an absolutely fantastic author. I'll read it again at some point because it's Hap and Leonard. Savage Season, Joe Lansdale. Great stuff. All right. That's all I have on hand. Next up, we have... I didn't write the first part of this down. I didn't write down Werewolf. Conspicuous Consumption by Stuart Von Allman. And this is from White Wolf's World of Darkness. and there's a bunch of teenagers. They call themselves the Lost Pups, and their parents are werewolves. The Guru, as they're known in White Wolf, and they're sort of called by their parents to help fight the worm, Wyrnm, worm. Blood loss. Anyway, so the Lost Pups, these teenage werewolves, are called to fight the worm, which is the big baddie in the whole werewolf world from White Wolf. It's definitely not the best of the White Wolf or World of Darkness, White Wolf's World of Darkness books. But I was getting into that stuff, so I was reading all of it. Some were good, some weren't. This one, it's on the low side. Then we have Bloodlines by Tanya Huff. This is another Vicki Nelson story. Third in the series. Vicki, I think she's a cop in the first one. She's losing her eyesight, if I remember correctly. At this point, she's a private eye. And Henry Fitzroy is a vampire who writes romance novels. And Henry is having nightmares about the sun. He goes to Vicki, and they end up teaming up with her ex-partner, Mike Salucci, whatever his name is. But this deals with a mummy. And what I liked about this series, I believe the first book was vampires, focused on vampires, introduced us to all these characters. Second book focused on werewolves. Third book focusing on a mummy. I'm in. Give me these classic monsters. They're good books. And there's something big that happens in one of the books that was spoiled by a cover artist, the guy that was doing the covers for the original paperback releases, I believe. And I was talking to him on the phone because I just called him out of the blue one day. Found his phone number in the phone book. I've talked about this. But yeah, we were talking about these books because he did the covers, and he mentioned something. And I was like, hey, dude, I haven't read that far yet. But I remember where that took place. But anyway, Bloodlines, Tanya Huff. Good stuff. Then we have another reread, A Savage Place by Robert B. Parker. It's a Spencer novel, another sort of fish out of water Spencer novel, where Spencer goes to Hollywood to protect a reporter. Candy Sloan, I want to say her name is. But she's in danger, and for whatever reason, a Boston private investigator is hired to protect her. I do like this book. There's one thing that I don't like that Spencer does, but it is good writing. It shows that he's a human character, that he makes mistakes. It's just one that I am very against. That's all I'm going to say. I don't want to spoil it, because if you haven't read any of the Spencer books by Robert B. Parker, and you're a fan of Private Eyes and Mysteries, you absolutely should be reading the Spencer books by Robert B. Parker. And I can back that up, because the next book I read is Ceremony by Robert B. Parker, another Spencer book, one of my favorites. This is the one that introduces April Kyle. She's a runaway. Spencer's hired to find this runaway April Kyle, but it turns out she's just not your typical teenage runaway. Not just your typical teenage runaway. There's much more going on. She's a great character. It's a great story. I don't want to spoil it. It has a very unexpected ending, but I like how this story ends. But Spencer, looking for, I believe, 14-year-old April Kyle, who will come back in at least one more Spencer book later. Not on this list, or this video. But Ceremony, Robert B. Parker, good stuff. Then we have Guild by Edward Gorman. This is the first in the Western Guild series. The main character is Leo Guild. He's a bounty hunter. He's an ex-lawman. Something tragic happened when he was a sheriff. So he's living with that, dealing with the PTSD of that as he's bounty hunting. and he's hired by another sheriff to help out in this small western town. And it's one of those, the big rich family owns everything in town and is suppressing the people. But Edward Gorman, great writer, tons of mysteries. That's where I first encountered him, but writes good westerns as well. Then we have The President's Daughter by Jack Higgins. Possibly my favorite thriller author. I've talked about A Prayer for the Dying, a book I've read many, many, many times. I've reread a few of his books. President's Daughter is in the Sean Dillon series. Sean is an ex-IRA enforcer who's now like a security expert, and the president's daughter is kidnapped. Sean Dillon comes in to try to find her, find out what's going on. It's good. It's a good thriller. Jack Higgins knows how to write a thriller, and they're not. I think the reason that I like him so much is his writing doesn't get bogged down for me the way that Robert Ludlum or John Le Carre, or however you say his name, the way writers like that, I think, can be very dry. And Jack Higgins is really quick. And he doesn't get, again, bogged down in a lot of stuff. So The President's Daughter, Jack Higgins, good stuff. Then we're back to Ed Gorman, Blood Game by Ed Gorman. And I believe, let me just check, yes, this is another Guild book, the Bounty Hunter Guild. This time he gets involved in boxing, this crooked boxing promoter. And Guild is looking for a fighter who's gone on the run. But the thing with this is a racially charged book. And because these boxing matches are set up between white fighters and black fighters, and essentially they're set up so that the white fighters can just beat the shit out of the black fighters, even going so far as to beating them to death with no consequences. Of course, the audiences are white folks that just love to see this. Let's see some black people get beat to death. So Guild not only has to find this sort of runaway fighter, but deal with this really shitty situation. Again, Ed Gorman, great writer. Good westerns. All right. Now we're getting into it. Next we have Murder by the Numbers by Max Allan Collins. This is one of his Eliot Ness books. So, excuse me. After helping to take down Al Capone, being part of the Untouchables, Eliot Ness became the safety director in Cleveland, Ohio. I like that. So this is true. Max Allan Collins, who really likes writing historically based fiction, wrote 3 or 4, maybe more, Eliot Ness novels that all take place in Cleveland. And so I don't think this is the first one. I think I started reading them out of order because this was the first one I found. Unless I'm forgetting because of the blood loss that I've already mentioned, like way back on this list, one of the other Eliot Ness books. But anyway, Murder by the Numbers is, you've got the mafia and the African-American numbers racket going to war, Eliot Ness trying to stop it. Let's see, did I write down the year? 1938 is when this takes place. That seems very early. Maybe that's correct. Maybe I wrote it down wrong. But anyway, I love these books. I don't have them at the moment, or I'd be showing you one, but I see that they are available. I think I'm going to pick these up and read them again because it's Max Allan Collins is a great writer. Eliot Ness is an interesting person, I think, and it takes place in Cleveland. So, yeah, Eliot Ness taking on the numbers racket and the mafia in Cleveland. Murder by the Numbers, Max Allan Collins. The penultimate is Graves Retreat by, now I have Ed Gorman instead of Edward. I write it down the way it is on the cover. So apparently, this cover just said Ed Gorman instead of Edward. But it's Graves Retreat, Ed Gorman. This one is in 1884. And, this is the one. It's possibly his first novel. I saw something that said debut novel. But this takes place in Cedar Rapids, and it's essentially about a killer who also becomes a star baseball player in Cedar Rapids. And it's a lot of like historical information in this book. And I guess Ed Gorman was from Cedar Rapids. So it's Western, but it's also baseball. Like, baseball's a big part of it. But it's very, very, very early Ed Gorman. A little rough. And then finally, the last book that I read in August of 1998 is Night of Shadows by Edward Gorman. Again, Edward, as opposed to Ed. So this is historical fiction, I suppose. I probably should have written down what year this took place in, but basically it's about Anna Tolan, the first uniformed policewoman in the United States, and she gets involved in a case. So it's a fictional account. You know, it's not written as a biography or anything, but it is based on the actual life of Anna Tolan. And it might be the first in a series. I don't remember if he did more. We'll possibly find out as we go through this list. But yeah, Ed Gorman, very much like Max Allan Collins, liked to ground a lot of his stuff in reality. Maybe I shouldn't say a lot of his stuff. Some of his stuff. He'd actually take historical things and write novels about them. And I feel like there's an episode of The Dollop based on Anna Tolan, or at least where Anna Tolan comes up. I feel like I recall an episode where they talk about the first uniformed policewoman. I'm almost certain. I'll have to look into that. The Dollop, great American history comedy podcast. It's hilarious. So there you go. That is everything that I read in August of 1998. I think that's a pretty good mix. You've got a classic coming-of-age horror story, Boy's Life, Robert McCammon. Some of my favorite authors, Joe Lansdale, Robert B. Parker. Thrillers, mysteries, horror, werewolves, all sorts of crazy stuff. So there you go. Once again, did not think of a question ahead of time, but we're going to do this real easy. What's your favorite coming-of-age story? Boom. For the horror fans out there, I kind of expect to hear a lot of Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. I, as usual, don't have an answer off the top of my head. I really like Ghoul. I really like Ghoul because it takes place basically the age of the characters and the time it takes place pretty much matches up my age at that time. It's got some of that autobiographical Brian Keene stuff going on. Things that happened to the character in the book actually happened to Brian Keene, and he's less than a year younger than I am, I believe. So I really do like that. It's great. It's well written, excuse me, because it's Brian Keene, and so even without that, I think it's a really good book, but I have that little personal connection to it. Boy's Life, fantastic. The Body, great story. I'm not a huge fan of The Body. I've only read it once, and it was decades ago. Maybe if I read it again, it would hit a little harder. It's no The Mist. But great movie. It is a great story. I think James Newman, Black Rain, I feel like is the name of his coming of age, if I have this correct. Um, it's a good book. For me right now, I'd say it's a toss up between The Ghoul and Boy's Life. Two great coming of age stories. Uh, I've read The Ghoul most recently, so I feel like that might be giving it the edge. If I reread Boy's Life, I might not be waffling so much. But anyway, what about you? Do you read? Do you like coming of age stories? If so, what is your favorite? Maybe there's some I haven't heard of or read yet. Let me know in the comments below. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put those in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post spoiler warning. We try to be polite here on my channel. Please like, share, and subscribe. All the usual YouTube stuff. If you care to follow me on other social media. Still on Twitter, at Ronin5757. Instagram, where I post pictures of books, comic books, board games, and fuzzy animals. It's Eric Smith 5757. That's Eric with a K, ERIKSMITH 5757. That is all I have for you this week. So until next week, read more books.